WebSockets enable full duplex communication, which means the client and server can communicate in real time. So they are used to build notification systems, gaming leaderboards, and chat applications. We'll implement this in Node.js and React. We create an index file and get the packages express, socket.io, and course. And then obviously we have to import them as well. So let's just do that. Let's create express application and create a server. And we would need to attach course as well. We shall now create a socket server and pass it our newly created server with course options. Now let's register an event listener. This one is for the connection and it returns a socket and it passes a socket in the callback. That socket has an ID attached to it which we use to recognize multiple connections. We emit a message on this newly created socket and let's just emit its ID for now. Now listen on the event disconnect and it passes us a reason in the callback. We'll just console log the reason and the ID that was disconnected. Let's start this over now. On the side of React, we get Axios and Socket.io client packages. Let's make some imports. Let's get the use effect and use ref hooks. Also, we would need Axios as well. We also need IO from socket.io client. This will be used to create the client and connect it to the server. We give our server address. In this case, it's a local host. Let's build the client and make it connect to the server. We can also pass in some options, and for now we're going to set the auto connect option to false. That means unless we say explicitly to connect to the socket, it won't. Also here as well, we will register some event listeners, and let's register the first one on connection. And let's create another one for when we receive a message from our server. We can just console log that message and the callback does pass us that message. We create a crisp UI that is testimony of human evolution. We give it a button to connect to our socket and we store the reference of that button. Write a handle connect and where it would connect to the socket if it's disconnected and vice versa otherwise. On the node application, rename the event to message. This is the message that we're going to send to our React application. Let's start the server and see what happens. Start the React server as well. The big button is here. Open inspect element and let's go to console to see any messages printed. Click connect and there you go. The socket connected and this is the socket ID that was connected. Let's see that on backend as well. Okay, new socket connected and this is the socket ID. I think this is the same. If it disconnect, here it is. Socket this disconnected. Reason is client name space disconnected. That means this client pressed disconnect. Now we'll send notifications to specific users, a dedicated notification system. Create a new file called socket connections that would manage the socket connections per user. Suddenly some code will appear. It manages socket connections to new users or users that are here from different tabs or different browsers. And it also manages sending and removing sockets. We shall write a socket middleware that provides us with the data that is required to build this logic. We get user ID and session ID. Session ID is used to recognize a user from multiple browsers or tabs. We use crypto library to generate a random string that would be used as a session ID. And now if there is no session ID from our auth handshake, we create a new one and attach it to our socket. In another case, we just attach the existing one and we attach also the user ID to our socket and this socket shall be used in our further communication. Let's also print the user that was connected so that we know if multiple users, if different users are connecting or if the same user is here from different tabs. Now, in connecting a new socket, we create a new socket connections instance that will store this socket and all the information regarding user and session. And let's send the newly created session ID as well that will be stored on the front end. And on the front end, we create a auth handshake and we create ID state to store the user ID. Create a minimal login handler that will simulate the login functionality. In this login, we set the ID and we're just going to get this ID from an input field. I will create a button to login and let's remove the reference because we don't need the reference for this one. We don't need to change the text, but we do need to give it a proper handler. We also need an input field to get that ID. In the session ID listener, you can store this ID in the local storage because when you're going to do actual login, you will need this ID for your subsequent socket connections. Now we need something to stimulate the notifications with, so we build an endpoint. This endpoint will send the notifications to the specific user. Write a function to call that endpoint. Let's create a function to make the call to that endpoint and given the user ID and a button to do so. Let's pull this down and we don't need the use effect also, so let's remove that. There's a mistake here. We need to see if there is no user ID, then send the error message. Let's start the server and see what happens. Start the React server as well. Now we shall give it a user ID. We shall log in and then connect. Now this socket will be connected for user ID 1, right? And if we generate a notification, there is no notification, no item in map for user 1. All right. So why is that? That is because, yeah. So we do not need to parse int. We need to let it go as string. Okay, let's try that again. Now we are connected on 1. And if we generate notification now and we receive a message from 1. Now we have successfully stimulated the notifications. Let's try it from a different browser and see if we get notifications on both our browsers if we log in from the same user. Log in from the same user, connect the socket and generate a notification, and we receive the notification from 1 again. And here the number is 8, which was 4 before. And if you generate the notification here, it becomes 12, and there it becomes 8. Disconnect now and let's see the message. This socket disconnected, and now if we generate the notification, there will notifications for only one browser, not the other. So this is how you build a notification system that works on multiple browsers and multiple tabs for the same user. You can extend it to user roles as well. Now you can tell your project manager that you're going to build your notifications on sockets because you do not want to over-engineer your application. Also, this is what happens when you press that subscribe button. I get a notification. They have probably built it on sockets. Nah, just kidding.